Eric's responsible for electrification in general, and I mean that. I mean, the world as we know it, EVs, panels, basically the ability to have a smart grid was enabled by what he did at Silver Springs Network, which is not to say insignificant into kind of the change of history for everyone across the United States. And then we have Laura, who is a pioneer as the first, I believe you are the first Chief Zero Officer in the entire United States. And that's no small task either. Once again, when Paul took over, I had the pleasure of working with some other utilities, and they all thought that SMUD was insane for setting such ambitious goals. But as we've seen, if you set ambitious goals, you achieve ambitious results. I want to give them a chance to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get right into the questions because we're kind of tight on time. And so I'm going to turn it over to Laura first.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sacramento. I'm Lauren Guy, SMUD's Chief Zero Carbon Officer. And just to feed off of what Andrew was just saying, so I first met Eric during smart meters, our smart meter rollout. And so we were on the path of doing kind of that one-way AMI. It was AMR at the time, right? So it was the automated meter reading, and so doing the drive-by meter reads. And so then this other technology came out. We quickly stopped, and our board gave us the approval to pivot. And so we did pivot and move towards advanced metering infrastructure, which is amazing that we did, because I think a lot of the things that we're doing today would not be possible. So I would like to echo what Andrew was just saying, that working with Silver Springs at the time with Eric and his team, obviously when you're rolling out new technologies, there's always challenges. There's always going to be challenges. And I think that's one thing that SMUD has done really well, is understanding that not everything's going to go perfectly, but being able to work through those issues and keep pushing forward. You're going to end up in a place where you would not have been able to if you did not do that. So been with SMUD for about 20 years, kind of came up through the poles and wire side of the business. The job before this, I was responsible for distribution operations and maintenance, so had our control center as well. I'm responsible for the implementation of our ADMS and DERM system, which is very much dependent on the meter data coming into that. So we've got a new control system within our operations center. And then when the 2030 plan was announced, transitioned to this role. So thank you. Nice to be here.
I think, SMUD is unique in the world of utilities for some of the reasons you've heard everybody talk about this morning. And we've been back here in Sacramento, and of course we've had a lot of chances to be back with ESS, but it does take me back to the days of smart meters. I'm not choking up, I'm literally choking. Excuse me. But I had a chance, was reminiscing with Paul last night, and this will resonate with Laura, when the smart meter rollout happened and smart grids as a concept started to hit here in California and here at SMUD, it was not, we look back now and it looks like such an obvious decision, right? You say, well, of course that's what we did because it enabled all of these things. I would guarantee it was not an obvious decision at the time. And, going out and talking to the community and engaging in people who were convinced that the RF was gonna melt their heads, and all of these other, issues. But what Paul reminded me of last night was something that today we totally take for granted. The number one customer complaint from SMUD customers is nested outages. Now, this may sound like it's in the land of obscura, but when there's a power outage and people get it, there's two things they want to know. When's the power coming back on, right? And then when the crew comes through, they want to know that the power got restored. And without the technology, you couldn't do that. And I can tell you that was somewhere secondary, tertiary, somewhere down in the bin. But the ability to transform the way you provide customer service is now an expectation. And this was in a day before most people had cell phones. This was in a day that we had a different expectation of the real-time interface. And so I think one of the things that SMUD's done a really outstanding job of, and it's a real challenge as we head into this next phase of the transformation of the industry, is not just to try to be responsive to customer needs, but really anticipate where the industry is going. And imagine all of the complexities and all of the interrelations between systems that are going to get us to this future state that we want to get to. And that's more than just being a reactive player. You really have to do what SMUD's done, and I agree with you. Maybe it's crazy, but maybe it's brave, but it's certainly pioneering to not just set an ambition or a goal for zero, but to publish a plan for zero. And I think that's something that is really unique in SMUD's case. I go travel around the world. I know lots of people who have zero carbon decarbonization ambitions, but they're just that, they're goals. They're not plans. And the difference between having that as an aspiration and having that as something you're actively working to deliver is night and day.
I agree with you more, and I'm going to hop right into a question for Laura. To that end, like this plan, what are the major challenges that you've encountered in terms of like infrastructure, regulatory and compliance, or technology, along this path?
So I would say, you heard Paul talk this morning about a lot of the I guess the successes that we've had, but obviously those don't come without challenges. And so I would say one of the biggest challenges has probably been around permitting and land use. And so because we are a municipality, our board can permit our projects ourselves, which is a complete advantage. But we are community owned. We are good stewards of that community. And so we do work through the local jurisdictions in order to get our permitting done, although we can override and permit ourselves. And so I think the land use has been a challenge. Obviously, if you're changing out your entire portfolio at the same time, you're going to need to build a lot of things, right? And so it's been a struggle. I think one of the bigger challenges has been kind of just north of our service territory. We were building a solar and storage facility, so it's our Country Acres project. It's a 344 megawatt solar farm with 172 megawatts of storage. I'm happy to say that we broke ground this month, so it's actually in construction right now. But I think one of the challenges there was it was ag land, and so how do we leverage and transition that ag land into solar and storage? And so working with the communities there, we realized that the ag land was extremely important to them, just as it is to us and to our board. And so we've partnered with UC Davis. It will be one of the largest agrivoltaic sites in the United States once it's completed. We're looking at orchards are a big thing in Placer County as well, so understanding that community and understanding what their needs are. We are proving out, we're doing solar panels that are raised up high enough for the orchards as well to be out there. So we're doing an orchard underneath some of the solar panels. And so I think it's really, there's challenges obviously in everything that we're doing. I think again, the land use is a big one, but working with the local communities, working with the local jurisdictions to make sure that we understand what are their needs, what are their desires, and then trying to figure out how do we navigate a win-win for both areas has been key.
And in that vein, right? So we know that long duration storage is going to be key. We're looking at like the TVA and Duke Energy that are amending the IRP because they're saying they can't depend upon this 4 terawatts of renewables that are in the pipeline to actually be there when they need it to. So this question's for Eric. Providing long duration storage, what unique challenges do you see in supporting like utilities like SMUD and their ambition? And accelerating their journey? Like, what are the challenges, and how do you see ESS helping to overcome those challenges?
Sure. Well, I think Paul said it in his opening, and I think it's great to remind everybody about if we go off and talk to customers and ask them what they want. And in a group like this, we probably think the clean part, the C, is the most important thing, right? Because we're on a zero carbon journey. But if you talk to customers, the reliability and affordability parts really come before clean, right? You talk to customers and they say, first off, when I flip the switch, the lights have to come on, right? Then, please have it not cost an arm and a leg. And by the way, if you could not kill the planet along the way, that'd be great, right? But that's the order in which customers think about it. So where long duration storage comes in is this idea of the resiliency and the reliability of the system. And so, and this has been, by the way, not a particularly new topic. I've been involved and looked at technologies in this space dating back to the late aughts, so 2006-07, because we could see, even though renewable penetration numbers were in the 5% range, really low, you could see that having a callable, firmed asset was going to be critical to making sure that the lights would stay on. We also knew that there was a different technology and a different chemistry to do that. So what are the challenges? Well, there's a lot of them. You're introducing a new technology, kind of solving a new problem in a new way, and trying to do it without using some of the technologies and falling into some of the traps that previous technologies have suffered from, particularly around safety and around supply chain. You know, something that is, I think, these days now getting a little bit more discussion than maybe it did 5 or 6 years ago, is we're looking at where do the products come from that we're using to drive decarbonization, and if it's something that relies on mineral extraction from Latin America, South America, Africa. Gets boated across to China for processing, gets put into a product and shipped back over to us here. The total carbon impact of some of these things isn't nearly where we want it to be. So for ESS, what we're trying to do is trying to build an entirely domestic supply chain to build the products that then can work reliably, durably, safely for 20 years or more. Because to make this product work for SMUD and for other utilities, the product has to be really reliable, really safe, and it has to last for a really long time. So anybody that's building, and I'm sure other folks here in the room that are building technologies for the utility industry in general, recognize that the bar is a little bit higher here than it is in some other products. If you're building a consumer product and maybe you've got a cool idea, or maybe it's a digital online presence or something, the product cycles go really quickly and people expect them to last for a couple of years. In our industry, we expect stuff to last for decades, right? That's part of the payback. And so the bar of introducing new technologies in this space is a little bit higher. It's maybe not quite mil spec, but it's somewhere just south of that in terms of the reliability and the durability. So I think that's part of the challenge that we face, is how do we grow up really fast, right? How do we get the technology to scale? How do we get it to the cost points it needs to be? How do we get it to the reliability, durability, resilience that the product needs to be? Because that's core to the mission that it's trying to fulfill for SMUD or for any other utility.
And that's a great response. And that brings up, like, just as an example, I know a friend of mine, Louis Ting, retired a substation that's been in continuous use since 1912 last year in LA, right? That's the environment we're in, where it's extremely low risk. And by its very nature, innovation is basically imparting risk. This is a question for Laura, right? So it's great the technology's there. It's great that, we have the ambitions. But culturally, right? So if you look at the 6 key roles of a CEO, number one probably is like setting the culture. How has SMUD had to adapt its communication strategies with stakeholders, including the board, community, customers, employees, to keep everyone aligned and engaged culturally in this ambitious goal? And additionally, like, what other cultural changes have been implemented internally to ensure that this organization is ready to meet those challenges?
So I think from an external standpoint, I'll start there. When we first started the plan, you heard Paul talk about 6 months of community engagement, so making sure that we were out talking to the community, making sure that they understood what we were doing and got their input into what our plans were and what our goals were. And we did hear from them that workforce development was key. Affordability is absolutely key, so being able to continue to pay their bills. And so I think when we developed that plan, that's why affordability and reliability became our guardrails, to make sure that as we are moving forward, that we do not jeopardize that affordability and reliability. And that promise of no community left behind that Paul touched on is extremely important as well. As we transition to the clean energy future, it's really important that we are engaging with all of our stakeholders, especially those that traditionally have been left behind. And so that is a promise that we made to the community during those community outreach sessions. And I think that was a really big thing in getting the community on board in what we're doing. Yes, we have big portions of our community that want the clean energy. They also, again, want affordability, reliability, and that environmental justice aspect is important to a lot of our community members, again. And so getting that understanding of what our community needs and wants was really key, and I think we're delivering on a lot of that. Internally, we do our board updates twice a year, so we communicate with our board twice a year on the status of our 2030 zero carbon plan. We obviously communicate a lot more than just the formal board meetings and twice a year. We actually receive emails probably from our board daily in terms of different things that we're looking at and what we're doing. And they're very involved in our community as well. They're voted into office. They represent the communities that they live in and reside in. And so they are very active in talking to our community members. They attend community walks with us. So when we're looking at electrification efforts, they're out in the community talking to customers, letting them know about our programs as well. And so there's a huge amount of input and participation from our board members. In addition, we do community events in terms of community updates, and we do that twice a year as well to provide those that are interested an update of where we're at on our 2030 plan. And we also post every year a status update on how we're progressing. In terms of internally and on our internal culture, so within my teams, I've got responsibility for the integrated resource planning, so big portion of energy supply, integrated resource planning, our power generation assets, maintenance of those, and then project development of all the new renewables that are coming online. Customer programs in terms of distributed energy resources, research and development, grants and partnerships. And so there's a lot of the work that's happening across the organization, but a big portion of that work is happening within my area as well. And we spent probably the first year doing a ton of change management to make sure that we were ready for what's coming. SMUD has always been a leader. We've always been kind of that leading edge on things. But this was a huge undertaking, again, across the entire organization that we needed to make sure that we were all marching in that same direction. And I think having the vision from the board and from our CEO that this is what we're accomplishing and when we're accomplishing it by, really got us all marching in the same direction. And then making sure that I was working with all of those leaders across my organization that are really responsible for the implementation, understanding from their aspects what are the changes that we're thinking we can't do, what are the roadblocks, what are the things that are helping us to achieve that. And so we had sessions once we had sessions with our leader. I had sessions with my leadership team to really go through what are those obstacles, and then we group those obstacles because there's a lot of fear when you're making a change like this, right? And so we were able to then say, okay, let's write down everything we can think of as our obstacles, and then we distilled it down to like 5 things, and then it became more manageable, right? So we had all of these big fears, brought it down, boiled it down to 5 things that we were actually worried about, and then I assigned each one of my senior leaders in charge of one of those things and formed teams within, cross-functional teams within my area with the supervisors and managers to say, okay, now we're gonna go tackle those 5 things so we can get going on this plan. So it's removing that fear, it's creating action plans, but it's really establishing a culture where people believe that they can speak up and raise issues, because what you don't wanna do is have it be so directive that people cannot say, we're making a mistake here, or the culture doesn't support the fact that we're gonna change direction, because you're gonna change direction probably 5 or 6 times before you get there. You're gonna have to pivot. And so creating that culture where people can speak up and they feel safe doing so, and that they're part of that process to achieving that goal is key to success.
Folks, I can tell you, matter of factly, that is not a normal utility. The whole idea, like adaptability, the ability to speak up, that's incredible. And kind of on that note, kind of externally for utilities, there's a lot of change. And like the broader culture of utilities, we've seen, like I mentioned, those 2 huge IRP amendments, which are just absolutely unfathomable 5 years ago, where you're looking at additional 6 gigawatts of firm load being added on the East Coast. Eric, the question to you is like with these kind of electrification in terms of transportation and data centers, kind of what are the opportunities and challenges that you see, and how do these impacts affect ESS, and how can ESS help utilities out in terms of these transitions?
Yeah, well, I think you kind of hit on it, and Paul alluded to it. When these conversations started and these goals started to get set, there was an expectation of taking the system. We have an electricity system, and we're going to decarbonize the electricity system. And as Paul alluded to, SMUD was doing things like 1.5% annualized energy efficiency, and that's kind of pretty common. You know, California in total is an amazing story. If you look back in California, total electricity consumption in the state of California is about flat from where it was when 20 million people lived in the state. So we went from 20 million to 33 million people, and we did not increase electricity consumption. And now all of the sudden, we're going to electrify everything, including transportation, data centers, all of these other use cases. We're seeing growth now 4.5% annualized, and that's going to accelerate even higher in some areas. If you carry that forward and you look at it on a global basis, we're probably going to have to build an electricity system that's somewhere between 3 and 3.5 times the size of the global electricity system. And oh, by the way, let's do it without carbon. Sounds easy enough, right? So I think Laura hit on one of the things, the pace and with the kind of the organizational transformation that SMUD's going through. Utilities have historically, to kind of pull in an old networking analogy, in routers in a network, there's a default configuration. You can either set it to default deny or default allow. And it's a really simple concept. In a default deny, all traffic is blocked other than the specific traffic that you whitelist that can go through. And then in default allow, everything can get through except for the things you say can't, right? Utilities have historically been default deny organizations, right? Right? It's like the answer is no, and then what was the question again? We're not going to do it. And I think as an industry, that's been the way we've operated. It's not picking on any one utility. It's kind of a cultural thing, because we've had reliability and safety as such paramount things that the answer was, like if you touch something, we all know this in our own businesses. If you tinker with something, it might break. So if it's working, don't break it. And yet now we find ourselves in a position that, we'll put a positive spin on it and say we're going to transform it, but we're really breaking it. We're breaking the old thing to build a new thing. And I think that's a real challenge organizationally for people to get their heads around, and it takes organizational change. I would say SMUD's fortunate that the board, that alignment between the board, the leadership, and the staff gets everybody pointed at a North Star that they can go drive at. As I look around the world, to answer kind of specifically your question, although everybody seems to align to the big goal, mostly, wherever you go in the world, there is not that alignment from a regulatory and statutory perspective on through to the leadership of the utilities, on through to the organizations. That's kind of problem number one. And so we're not seeing that alignment, rulemaking happening at a regulatory level fast enough to set the pace to allow things to happen, which leads to the second problem, which is the pace at which we're implementing by and large as an industry is way too slow. And I'll give an example from, I know the SMUD folks know this, we have a customer in Germany called LEAG. LEAG is the second largest generator in Germany. They're an interesting story for people of a certain age, meaning old guys like me, in that it's an old Soviet-era East German power generation. It's lignite coal. Literally, the coal comes out of the ground onto a conveyor belt into the plant where it's burned and they make electricity. Never hits a truck, never hits a train. It's all done on site. Of course, that's going away. By 2037, it has to be fully decommissioned. And so LEAG set a plan to build initially 7 on their way to 14 gigawatts of solar, and pair that with 2 to 2.5 gigawatts of long-duration storage to create green baseload power in Germany. Great ambition, great plan, right? The first phase of the first project that we're building with them is targeted to build a 50 megawatt, 500 megawatt hour battery, which if it were in place today, which it's not, it would be the largest single battery installation in Germany. Right? Pretty cool. So it all sounds great. For them to stay on plan for what they need to do, they need to replicate that 500 megawatt hour battery once a quarter, every quarter, for a decade. So remember, there's nothing this big in all of Europe today. And this is one utility that represents 10% of the generation in Germany. And that's the pace they have to go at to still slightly miss their goal. So when you think about the challenge we face as an industry, the biggest single thing that we see, and we're trying to think through how we can kind of chip in and do our part of the solution, is we just have to be doing this at a pace and a scale on a global basis that is unlike anything anybody has ever experienced before. And that's the utilities, that's the vendors, that's the regulators, everybody. So the last thing I'd say about it is, that's a little bit related to that, is this flat load growth that we've seen over the last 2 decades. One way to look at it is nobody, as much as I love Paul, neither Paul or any other CEO of any utility in America has ever been in a leadership position with a utility when there's been load growth. This is new for all of us, right? We're all going through this for the first time ever. And so that adds a degree of difficulty to how we kind of manage through that.
That is a great answer. And I want to kind of end and give you guys the last word, but it's going to be, I'm going to ask you for 3 things, right? And this is in connection to both getting to zero as well as how do we manage this low growth or help others manage this low growth. And I want 2 things to do. Like if you can tell Laura, a CEO of another utility, do these 2 things and don't do this one thing, what would it be?
That's a hard answer, hard question to answer, because I don't think it's not a one-size-fits-all across utilities, right? So we have different geography, which means we have different access to resources. And so, we are very blessed here in Northern California to have access to sun, hydro, solar, to the wind, to geothermal for the carbon capture sequestration that Paul talked about. But what I would say is don't get stuck in terms of needing a perfect plan. When SMUD put out its plan, we acknowledged that we did not have the answer. So we had some of the answers, and that was in the plan, but we called it a flexible plan because we didn't know how we were going to get that last 10%. And I think that's what I would say and challenge utilities is do not wait for perfection. Move forward and make progress. And take advantage of the resources that you do have. And I would say the second thing is probably don't be afraid of bridging solutions. Paul talked about the carbon capture sequestration being a bridge to hydrogen. I really want to commend our board for the fact that they approved it. I did not believe that we would get carbon capture and sequestration approved in California because of the we're still burning natural gas. But the goal is to fight climate change. And if that is the goal, then we need to be open to bridging solutions. We need to start now, to start making progress, even if we don't have all of the answers. And we also need to be open to those bridging, those transitional solutions that immediately take carbon out of the air and have us move forward. So don't not progress because of imperfections in your plan and not having all the answers.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'll take a slightly different version of Laura's first answer, which is I think we need to kind of think, we've had a tendency in the industry to think in a very serial kind of manner, right? Thing 1 leads, you do thing 1, it gets to the end, and then you start thing 2, and you kind of move in that process, right? That's kind of the normal way, project planning way that we kind of think about things. And I don't know if it's kind of full-on agile development, because hardware is hard with agile from my experience, but I do think we have to be thinking in a much more dynamic way about how we plan. We got to be thinking in kind of waves of activity that are going to kind of hit some of them in the future. And part of that's just driven by the fact that in anything related to infrastructure, timing is hard, right? It takes a long time to do stuff. And so if you're 2030 is like the day, it's not tomorrow, but it's like the day after tomorrow, right? It's really soon, right? And so you got to be thinking today about some like right now stuff that you like you're pounding away on and you got to do, but you also got to be planting the seeds and doing the planning for things in the future, because you don't want to have at the end of the day your project plan fails because you didn't order a transformer in time. And that stuff happens all the time in the world today. So I'd say that's that'd be my kind of my one big bundled thing of saying, how do we need to collectively think different is, think about roadmaps and think about waves of plans that are going to implement and hit. And then the other thing on the don't do side, and I think this is a great example of what we've been trying to do with SMUD, and we're so appreciative of their support, is the way that we've kind of typically done projects in the industry is this very kind of almost confrontational or adversarial, vendor supplier kind of way of doing things. And that actually probably works really well if you're buying a commodity product that you've bought for, probably we could go to the SMUD procurement department. And there's a 12-inch thick binder that describes how they buy, poles, right, and down to material composition and everything else.
No, he's not joking.
Yeah,
He's serious.
right. And so, that's something that's really well understood. It's been you've been buying them for years. They don't change very much, and so you can have kind of a good cut the negotiators loose to try to squeeze 3 pennies out of the price of a pole kind of a thing. That doesn't work with innovative technologies and kind of new initiatives. And so I think everybody needs to get around and have a little bit of empathy in the conversation. Recognize as a vendor, and I'll kind of lecture all my vendor friends here who want to come in and say, hey, I've got this new thing, but I would like to transfer all of the risk profile to SMUD. Or to the utility, like you should take all the risk, and they say, I'm not taking any of the risk. You're going to take all the risk, and then nothing ever happens. And so I think we have to kind of have a different approach for how we engage in those conversations and have a lot more transparency and recognize that there's got to be some balance in how we move these things forward.
Sir, I can't thank you both enough for giving us, your time, energy, knowledge, and wisdom. Thank you both again for being pioneers. It's been my absolute pleasure to be on stage with you. I'm going to hand it over to Jason in a second. But before you guys go, there's one last thing because we're completely out of time. And final word, where do you see us in 2035? If you can keep it as short as possible. 2035, Laura, go.
Well, I would say that we have met our 2030 goals. We are fully decarbonized. I think we are still looking at our hydrogen because I think it's still in the future, probably post 2035 even. So I think we're still working in that direction, but
Excellent.
Fully decarbonized.
Yeah, I think that I'll take a technologist kind of view on it. I think that the things like long duration storage and some of the other core technologies that are being brought to market today are going to be they're going to be almost boring, right? Because we're going to say, well, of course, like we do that. And I say that because I'm going to use the smart meter, smart grid thing. Nobody today questions that, and it was not 15 years ago when people thought it was nuts.
I was one of those people. Thank you very much.